never thought I'd be the kind of man to go looking through his wife's phone. But when I found out she'd been posting explicit videos online, I couldn't help it. The strange messages, the late-night calls, the distant look in her eyes. It was like she was living a completely different life when she thought I wasn't paying attention. I had to know the truth. The first video was the worst. I stared at the screen, unable to look away. It was her clear as day. Her voice, her face, her body, all exposed for the world to see. My stomach turned as the images burned into my mind. Couldn't breathe. My hands trembled uncontrollably as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. How could she do this? How could she throw away everything we had built together? And worse, why didn't she tell me? We were supposed to be a team. We were supposed to protect each other, not drag our most intimate moments into the public eye for the entire world to dissect. I felt betrayed in the deepest sense, like the foundation of everything we had was crumbling beneath my feet. First, I thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe someone had hacked her account, or perhaps an old video resurfaced without her knowledge. But as I dug deeper, more clips began to surface. Private moments, intimate scenes, each one more explicit, more personal than the last. And they were all tagged with her name. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I confronted her directly, my voice firm, my hands shaking. "What is this?" I demanded, shoving the phone toward her. Her denial came instantly, quick and rehearsed. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice quivering slightly. "They're old mistakes. I wanted to delete them, but they're already out there." Mistakes. That word twisted in my mind like a knife. Old or not, they were out there, public, humiliating, and nothing she said could erase the damage done. I wasn't going to let her brush it off like it didn't matter. I pushed her for answers, demanding to know how far she had gone. How many videos? How many people? Her protests grew louder, more frantic. "It's not a big deal," she shouted. "It was just a phase, a mistake." But her panicked denials only made me more determined. I wasn't going to back down until I knew everything. The more she tried to minimize it, the more persistent I became. I needed to understand why she thought it was acceptable to strip away the privacy we once held sacred, to expose our most vulnerable moments to the entire world. Why she thought it was okay to risk our future, our trust, for something so fleeting and meaningless. I couldn't trust her anymore, not after this. The videos weren't just a mistake. They were a reflection of something deeper, something she wasn't willing to acknowledge. And I wasn't going to let it slide. The more I delved into it, the more twisted the situation became. I couldn't believe what I was uncovering. Each video, each new piece of evidence seemed to push her further into a web of deceit. She kept denying everything, acting like it was no big deal, but it was clear she had lied from the very beginning. After confronting her, things only escalated. She started pushing back harder, trying to shift the blame. "You don't understand," she said. "It was just a phase. It was before we were married, before we were serious. You're blowing this out of proportion. Before we were married. Before we were serious." That excuse cut deeper than the rest. It implied that none of what we had now mattered, that the relationship we had worked so hard to build was somehow insignificant compared to her past mistakes. It made me feel like everything we had was tainted, like she had always kept a piece of herself separate from what we shared. Couldn't let that stand. She might have thought she could smooth things over with a few words, but I was done listening. There was no going back from this. The worst part was knowing she hadn't been honest from the start. She had meticulously hidden this part of her life, carefully constructing a false narrative of trust and fidelity while, behind closed doors, she was living a completely different life. And now, the evidence was out there for everyone to see. Couldn't turn back. Every time I thought about the videos, about how easy it must have been for her to upload them, my frustration grew. The betrayal was deep, and I wasn't going to let her manipulate her way out of it. She begged, pleaded with me to stop. "Please," she cried, her voice breaking with desperation. "It's over now. I won't do it again. I swear." But her promises rang hollow. Trust had been shattered beyond repair, and no matter how many times she apologized or insisted it was in the past, the damage was done. There was no way I could forget what she had done, or the fact that it was already out there for the world to see. I knew I couldn't continue living like this. Every day that passed, every attempt she made to downplay the situation or pretend it never happened only made it worse. I couldn't share a life with someone who had so easily betrayed my trust. It wasn't just about the videos anymore. It was about who she truly was, and how little she respected what we had built together. Divorce became the only logical outcome. The idea of continuing to share a life with someone who had willingly dragged our most intimate moments into public view was unbearable. She could beg, cry, and swear all she wanted, but it wouldn't change the reality. Selling the videos was just the beginning of reclaiming control. There was no going back, no undoing the humiliation and pain. And as the videos circulated, I knew I had to prepare myself for the fallout. But I wasn't going to let her manipulate the narrative. This wasn't just her mistake. It was ours, and I wasn't going down alone. Selling the videos was the first step in reclaiming control, but it wasn't enough. I knew the moment I hit post that the backlash would be intense. The internet is a cruel place, a breeding ground for judgment and criticism, and yet, I couldn't allow myself to be silenced by her lies and manipulation. The videos spread faster than I anticipated. Within hours, they were everywhere, on forums, social media pages, even in private groups. Her face, her voice, her most intimate moments were being dissected by strangers. Comments flooded in, ranging from sympathetic to outright cruel. People questioned her character, her motives, and her sanity. But through all the noise, I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction. It wasn't the kind of satisfaction anyone would understand, but for the first time I wasn't the one left in the dark. I wasn't the one wondering what secrets she was keeping. The truth was laid bare, even if it came at a cost. Of course, she didn't take it lightly. She lashed out. Angry, desperate, and more manipulative than ever. "This isn't fair," she screamed at me one night. "You're ruining my life." Her desperation only fueled my resolve. "You ruined it first," I shot back coldly. "You had the choice to keep our lives private, but you didn't. You made your bed." She tried everything to stop me, pleading, begging, even trying to bargain her way out of it. "Please, I'll make it right," she begged. "I'll pay you back. I'll take them down." But her promises were meaningless. There was no undoing what had been done. The videos were already out there, impossible to erase completely. And every attempt to silence me just made her look more guilty. The divorce proceedings began, and they weren't easy. She fought tooth and nail, trying to maintain control over the situation. She claimed I was using her past against her, weaponizing it for personal gain. But the court saw through her lies. The evidence was overwhelming, and no amount of denial could change that. As the days dragged on, I became more resolute. This wasn't about revenge, it was about justice. She had crossed a line, and there was no coming back from it. Every decision she made only made her seem more reckless and deceitful. Meanwhile, her support system crumbled. Friends and family started distancing themselves, unable to defend her when the truth was so stark. Even her own parents couldn't shield her from the reality. They could see the damage she had caused, even if they tried to soften the blow. It was clear, she was alone in this. No one could save her now. The choices she made, the actions she took, had painted her in a light she could never fully escape. And as the divorce loomed closer, the weight of her betrayal pressed down on her more than anything else ever could. The divorce proceedings became a battlefield. Every detail was dissected, every argument sharpened to the edge. We sat across from each other in that cold, sterile courtroom, two strangers locked in a battle of wills. The once shared moments of joy were reduced to pieces of evidence, twisted and examined under the harsh light of scrutiny. Her lawyers tried their best to paint her as the victim. They argued that I had overstepped, that selling the videos was a violation of privacy, and a desperate attempt to tarnish her image. But no matter how they twisted the narrative, the truth was undeniable. She had willingly exposed herself to the public. I sat quietly, listening to her lawyer weave a tale of betrayal, as if she hadn't been the one to betray me in the first place. The irony wasn't lost on me. She talked about healing, about moving forward, while I knew she hadn't shown the slightest remorse for what she had done. Every question, every cross-examination, only dug the wound deeper. She kept denying everything, refusing to acknowledge her actions, painting herself as a misunderstood victim who had made mistakes in the past. But her denials rang hollow. The videos were real, the evidence was clear, and the court wasn't swayed by her theatrics. In the background, the fallout continued. Friends who once stood by her now avoided her. Her social media presence was all but gone. Her posts deleted, her accounts locked. The public shaming was immense, and every attempt to recover from it only seemed to deepen her humiliation. As her reputation crumbled, I felt a sense of distance, like watching a slow-motion car crash from the sidelines. It was hard to process at times, knowing how much destruction she had caused, and yet not being able to do anything to stop it. But at least, I no longer had to live in uncertainty. The court dates dragged on, but each passing session solidified my resolve. I wasn't looking for sympathy or closure. I wanted justice, and justice wasn't something that could be negotiated away with tears and empty apologies. Finally, the judge's ruling came. The divorce was finalized, and the assets were divided according to what we had agreed upon. Her requests for spousal support were denied, her claims of emotional distress dismissed. The court saw through the facade she had built, and her version of events crumbled under the weight of reality. As the gavel fell, signaling the end of our union, I felt a strange sense of relief. It wasn't about winning or losing anymore. It was about closing a chapter, about moving forward and reclaiming my life. She could deny everything, she could play the victim, but in the end, the truth was undeniable. And that truth was the only thing that mattered. The weeks after the divorce were a blur. Life felt different now, lighter, yet strangely emptier. The weight of everything that had happened still lingered, but I was no longer tethered to the chaos and betrayal. I had emerged from the storm, battered but resolute. Selling the videos wasn't something I had planned to become a business venture, but as more people reached out for copies, asking for the raw footage, I saw an opportunity. I didn't view it as exploiting her, it was about control. About making sure that no matter how much she tried to rewrite the past, the evidence was still there. The requests continued to pour in. Each download, each payment was a reminder that this wasn't a private matter anymore. It was a story that the world would never forget. I wasn't ashamed of what I had done, because it wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability. She hated that more than anything. Seeing her face plastered on screens and phones across the globe was a form of punishment she couldn't escape. She would fight tooth and nail to have it removed, but with every legal threat she made, the requests only grew. Her parents, once her greatest defenders, began to see the truth. They called, asking questions about how things had spiraled so far out of control. They tried to reconcile with me, desperate to understand how their daughter had come to this point. I told them everything. They listened, nodded, and eventually distanced themselves from her. Through it all, her desperation grew. The constant harassment, the rumors, and the public humiliation left her isolated. She had pushed everyone away, and now she was left with nothing but her regret, though she refused to admit it. I didn't revel in her suffering. There was no joy to be found in watching someone fall apart. It was about justice, about ensuring that she couldn't erase the reality of her actions. Every attempt to control the narrative, every denial, only fueled the inevitable unraveling. As time passed, the public interest began to wane. The videos faded into obscurity, replaced by new scandals and stories. But for her, the damage was permanent. Her name was now forever associated with betrayal and deceit, a scar she couldn't escape. In the quiet moments, when the weight of the situation didn't feel overwhelming, I began to rebuild. Relationships that had once been strained started to mend. Old friends reached out, curious, supportive, reminding me that life could move forward even after the most painful experiences. Divorce was final, and the past was firmly behind me. I was no longer bound by her lies or her need for control. I had faced the chaos head-on, and in the end, justice had been served, not through vengeance, but through truth. And with that truth came a sense of peace, no matter how bittersweet it was. Months turned into years, and life continued to move forward. The sting of betrayal had dulled, replaced by the steady rhythm of healing and acceptance. I had built a new life, one where trust wasn't a fragile illusion, and where control wasn't manipulated for selfish gains. Selling the videos had been a necessary step, but it wasn't the final chapter. As the dust settled, I began to focus on my own well-being. I surrounded myself with people who uplifted and respected me, people who weren't trying to hide or deceive. The online presence she once had became a shadow of what it used to be. Social media profiles disappeared, accounts were deleted, and her digital footprint was reduced to nothing more than ghost stories and whispered memories. Her attempts to reclaim her life became more desperate, more futile. I avoided digging into her life too much after the divorce. There was no point in revisiting the past. Her story was no longer my concern. My own journey was where my focus lay. Still, every so often, I would hear rumors about her. More scandals, more failed attempts to restore her reputation. It was a sobering realization. No matter how much she fought against it, her past had defined her. The videos had been just the beginning. Her deceit wasn't limited to those recordings. It was woven into her actions, her choices, and the way she had tried to manipulate and control the narrative at every turn. What hurt the most wasn't the videos themselves, but the realization that someone you loved and trusted could be capable of such deception. It was a betrayal of the highest order, a betrayal not just of trust, but of the very foundation of a partnership. Divorce had given me a fresh perspective on life. I saw clearly now what was worth fighting for and what was better left behind. Some scars will never completely fade, but they become part of the journey, reminders that growth often comes from the hardest battles. In the quiet moments, when my thoughts drifted to those dark days, I understood that the pain had been necessary. Without it, there could have been no clarity, no strength to move forward. She had tried to tear me down, to rewrite the narrative in her favor, but in the end, the truth stood on its own. And that truth was what ultimately set me free. Years passed, and life settled into a rhythm of its own. The initial storm had calmed, but the aftershocks lingered. Divorce wasn't something you could simply move past. It became a part of your story, a defining moment that shaped your perspective on trust, love, and personal strength. Selling the videos hadn't been an easy decision, but it had been necessary for my own peace of mind. I couldn't allow her actions to dictate my future. The world had seen the truth, and while the internet eventually forgot, the impact remained. Every comment, every share, was a reminder of the weight of betrayal. But time wasn't as cruel as it once felt. The pain softened, and I found solace in the small victories. Moments of joy and connection that I hadn't allowed myself to fully experience before. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine again. She continued to haunt my thoughts at times, not because I longed for her, but because her actions left a lasting impact on who I was and how I viewed relationships. There was no bitterness in those thoughts, just a quiet acceptance of what had happened. What surprised me most was the unexpected support that came from the people around me. Friends, family, and even strangers reached out, sharing their own stories of betrayal, offering solidarity and empathy. It created a network of understanding, a reminder that I wasn't alone in my struggles. In the end, it wasn't just about what she did. It was about how I chose to navigate the aftermath. There was no right or wrong way to handle betrayal, no guidebook for healing. Each person's journey was unique, shaped by their own resilience and willingness to confront the truth. As much as I wanted to leave the past behind, it was impossible to fully erase the experiences that had shaped me. But I realized that wasn't the goal. The goal was growth. Personal growth that came from pain, from reflection, and from the courage to face the hardest realities. And so, I moved forward, building a life that no longer revolved around the deceit and chaos of the past. The chapters one wrote were filled with hope, with the understanding that even in darkness, there could be light. Life, in its unpredictable way, continued to unfold. I had come to accept that the past would always be a part of me, but it no longer defined who I was. The truth had been revealed, the consequences faced, And now it was time to forge a new path forward. Selling the videos had been just one step in reclaiming my control. It wasn't about punishing her or seeking vengeance. It was about ensuring that the truth couldn't be silenced, that it couldn't be rewritten. And while her attempts to manipulate the narrative had failed, the memories of her betrayal still lingered. Yet, despite all the turmoil, I found peace in the simplicity of moving forward. The anger, the sadness, the confusion, they all began to blend into something more manageable. Life had a way of weaving together the threads of hardship into a tapestry of resilience. Every relationship I formed after the divorce was built on trust, not the fragile kind I had once known, but a deeper, more deliberate form. There was no room for manipulation or deceit, no space for control. It was liberating in its own way, to know that I could stand in my truth without fear of being deceived. Her name no longer carried weight in my daily life. It was a memory, a chapter of the past that had been closed and filed away. The emotional ties had been severed, leaving me free to build connections rooted in honesty and understanding. In time, I found happiness again, not the kind that sought validation from others, but the kind that came from within. A quiet confidence, a sense of purpose, and an awareness that life, no matter how unpredictable, could be navigated with grace. The journey wasn't without its struggles. The aftermath of betrayal, especially one as public as mine, left scars that time couldn't fully erase. But those scars became part of my story, woven into the fabric of who I had become. Looking back, I understood that while pain had been inevitable, it had also been necessary. It had shaped me in ways that no success or happiness ever could have. And as I continued to move forward, I knew that I was no longer bound by the chains of the past. The final pages of my story weren't written yet, but each day brought new chapters, new lessons, and new opportunities to grow. And with every step, I embraced the journey, not as a victim, but as someone who had emerged stronger from the fire.